What is coercive control?
Coercive control is the mental takeover of another human being, and it is this subjugation of another person's will.
Can you be in a narcissistically abusive situation and not be experiencing coercive control?
This week in Australia, coercive control became criminally able to be charged with a 14-year prison sentence.
If you've ever seen a domestic violence wheel, physical violence is a part of it. It's also manipulation. It's financial control. It is a wearing down of a sense of who you are.
The abuser is going to tell you that you asked for it, you wanted it. If it's a Cassie-like situation, you participated, you planned it, you're the one that agreed to it. And that's typically after a very long runway of their grooming, conditioning, and manipulation.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I'm your host, Stacey Urig. I have back with me again for the fifth time, Kimberly Weeks. She is the narcissistic abuse coach. You can find her on Instagram at I am Kimberly Weeks. Before we get started, if you're on Instagram, you want to go follow her, because her knowledge in the space of narcissistic abuse is really fantastic. If you know, you've been listening to these other episodes, she's been a mentor in the space to me. It's something that I feel really passionate about, and I love holding space for people who are struggling with narcissistic abuse. This is the fifth episode with Kim, and that was never really the intention. The intention was just a one and done, but it's so pervasive and the content is so important. And I think we both feel so strongly that the women who are struggling should be educated on why they're struggling, because the struggle is real. So just to recap, we've done 4 episodes so far. The first one was a down and dirty, what is narcissistic abuse? It's 101. How's it different from traditional abuse? Episode 2 is should I stay or should I go? Now that I know what I know. Episode 3 is I want to go, but I'm freeze. I just absolutely freeze when it's time to make that decision. Episode 4 is, all right, I've gotten the courage to leave, but oh my gosh, I did not know that my partner was going to utilize the legal system to weaponize me further and to abuse me further, utilizing the legal system, the courts, and the amount of money that needs to be spent. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. And again, none of this is to discourage. And it can feel discouraging when we're going through this process. But there's no value, in our opinion, for you not to know what you're getting into. And at the end of the day, the risk is worth the reward. The pain that you have to go through will be worth the reward at the end, because at the end you will be free in some way, shape, or form to be able to breathe and to be able to start to develop a life that is more aligned with what it is that you're seeking in your life. Now, today's episode is going to be around the concept of something known as coercive control. And in the courts, this is something that's really becoming a part of the DV cycle. And I just don't think that it is discussed enough. And it's very much in alignment with this narcissistic abuse and the psychological terror. So again, we're going to be talking about coercive control. And more specifically, we're going to start talking about how we're seeing examples of coercive control being played out in the media. Specifically, the most recent case is the Diddy case, which we will be talking about today. So welcome back.
Thanks, Stacey. I'm excited to be with you again.
Me too. All right, let's lay the groundwork. What is coercive control?
So coercive control is a pattern of manipulation, exploitation, and I'm going to use the term fear mongering to get a person to do your will, to get a person to meet your needs for whatever that person's desire is. And there's some specific, the reason it's connected to the DV cycle, because it has the same components as the abuse cycle. It has the same components when you look at the abuse, post-separation abuse cycle, which is what we talked about last time. It is a pattern of using fear to intimidate, to manipulate, to coerce, of course, coercive, and to dominate a person into basically giving over their agency to you. That's really what it's about. And so it's very much like a puppet, a puppeteering, creating an environment where that person can do things to initiate you and condition you into doing what they want on command. That's really at the base of it.
On command. Now, can you be in a narcissistically abusive situation and not be experiencing coercive control?
No, you cannot. You
I
cannot
love
because,
how firm you are with that.
yeah, you cannot. And you cannot because the root of narcissistic abuse is a person using another person for their gratification at your expense with no remorse.
Mm.
So in order to do that, another person has to literally lose their identity or it be extremely diminished. A person has to, or an abuser has to subdue, suppress, or mute the other person's identity, voice, sense of self, and ability to operate from their own agency. They have to steal their voice. They have to steal their mind and the mind's ability to make decisions. In many ways, I liken coercive control to putting somebody, and I said this in previous sessions, under a spell. You no longer have access to the parts of your brain that can operate independently from that other person fully. And they do this process through conditioning you, grooming you, and then there's a term called dog whistling, being able to get you to do things that only you and they know on command through use of terms that are, it's almost like codes that they're using in
Mm.
public or in private to get you to operate based on what they're saying. It is a coercive control wears down a person's mental capacity. Coercive control creates a kind of um, how do I say this?
I want to say submission.
Submission, and almost like a robotic. Like you become their toy. You
Yeah.
become their
Robot.
instrument. Yeah, their instrument, and you are not operating on your independent will anymore. They have
Okay.
worn down your mind to the degree that you are now operating based on their will.
And I think it's important that we have laid that framework because, I think people associate domestic violence, DV, with physical violence. And I think, if you've ever seen a domestic violence wheel,
Mhm.
physical violence is a part of it. However, it's also manipulation, it's financial control, it is a wearing down of a sense of who you are. And I know in many states, New Jersey included, they're really trying in the courts to get coercive control to be seen as a form of domestic violence.
Yes.
Um, bec- and let me ask you this, you may know the answer to this or not. If they're able to get that seen and recognized in the courts, can it be seen, is that considered a domestic dispute or a criminal dispute?
You
Do you
know,
know?
that's a great question. And actually, this week in Australia, coercive control became criminally able to be charged with a 14-year prison sentence in Australia. That happened this week. the courts in the United States do not have it in that way yet fully. But it is I want you to think about, it's a kind of programming, okay, in the CIA, in psychological warfare, in when they take prisoners of war,
In a
these
cult.
same in a cult setting, and they call narcissistic abuse a cult of one.
Yeah.
That literally, these are the same tactics used to program a person's mind to operate on command to another person's mannerisms, voice command. They call it predictive programming. And so that I want you to think about it. And I actually did a post today that said that you have survived what governments use to manipulate and coerce prisoners of war. You are a warrior to those people who've experienced this kind of abuse. Coercive control is the mental takeover of another human being. And it is this subjugation, we're going to use the word subjugation and oppression of another person's will. And because of that, it is incredibly dangerous. It's, we talk about from a global perspective, the propaganda and programming that happens to the masses. It's that way inside of a relationship dynamic
Mm.
or a family system. And that's why it's so dangerous because, as I've said in previous sessions that we've done, it's like someone slipped you a drug and you are no longer able to function with coherency, with the ability to choose. It's taking that will away from you. And what we've seen in many instances, they use fear, obligation, and guilt, which is fog, to
Fear,
create
obligation, and guilt.
fear,
Okay.
obligation, and guilt to create the programming, the environment for the programming. Over time, there are behaviors that occur that actually, whether it's what they call simple assault in the criminal court, where someone will punch a wall near you or punch a
Right.
steering wheel near you or come at you like they're going to hit you, or their body push you up against the wall without touching you and you're backed up against the wall, and they do something that creates the fear that they're going to do physical harm to you. These are instances where over time, the next time they ask you to do something, you're more likely to remember that fear and do whatever they say. And that's how the coercive control works. Often, abusers can do this without laying a hand on people, which is why it's so insidious and damaging, because there won't be proof.
But also difficult to prove in court.
Exactly. There won't be proof. There won't be physical harm to prove, even though they've gone through this processing of conditioning and programming you to follow their commands.
All right. So as you talk about that, the illustration that comes to my mind is the Maid, right? So if nobody's familiar, if you're listening and you're not familiar with the Maid was a beautifully made movie on Netflix.
Mhm.
Disturbing.
Mhm.
I think it was actually not a movie. I think it was more of like a limited series.
Series. Yeah.
Yeah. That really kind of showed
Mhm.
exactly what we're talking about here. You know, this relationship that started, she was a little confused because she wasn't really being beat, but she was very intimidated, fists in a wall, language had, to keep her submissive, and her, it was the experience of her trying to break away from it and why it was so difficult to break away. And if you're curious about learning about coercive control, that's a great illustration, an
Mhm.
example of what that looks like, but a really good illustration and example is something that's happening real time in our
Mhm.
media right now, which is the Diddy case.
Yes. There's some elements I wanna make sure that we cover, though.
Yeah.
What are the elements of coercive control?
So
There are
let's
things
do
like
it.
There's things like gaslighting, which is, someone doing something or saying something and then denying that they ever did or said it. And therefore, you begin to question your reality. You begin to question what's really going on. Gaslighting, harassment. If you try to have relationships with friends and family, or even have, you've left the person and you try to have another relationship with someone else, they harass you and call you into question your loyalty, your, whether or not you're a good person. People will, say you're promiscuous and all the rest of this stuff because you have relationships outside of them. Things like isolating you from your friends and family so that you no longer have support systems and other voices that can call that person's behavior into question.
Right.
Technological abuse, stalking, cyber stalking, having people monitoring your social media pages, physical stalking, showing up at your work, showing up at places that you are where you're going outside to, shop or, meet with friends and all of that stuff. And they show up. Things like constant degrading, constantly tearing down your sense of yourself. Um, doing things that are degrading or asking you to participate in things that are debasing, degrading, and dehumanizing. Um, Sam Vaknin, who is a psychologist or a world renowned narcissistic abuse expert, says that once they start devaluing you, they have to actually make what's in their head your behavior, so that the abuser will start to ask you to do things they know you don't want to do in order to have your behavior of being devalued match what you're actually doing in reality. And they coerce you to do it.
Can you give an example of that? Because I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
but
So let's say a person has had, and this is a real life example of something that I've heard. Let's say a young woman, a part of the abuse she had in a relationship was the person watching porn. And for her, that felt like a violation. And she says to her new partner that this is something that's been very hurtful to her and a part of her abuse from the previous relationship. In order to degrade her and devalue her, once that person, the woman, is very attached to the abuser will introduce into the relationship and convince her that because he's not the other person, that he should not be restricted from doing something that would bring their relationship closer together, even though it re-traumatizes that woman. That's an example of when they manipulate you to do something against your will that you've already told them was a part of your past that was harmful or hurtful to you. And they represent it as something that would be good for the relationship, even though you've already shared that that's something that was very violating to
and
you.
at that point you're so far in, you want to make them happy.
And they present it in a way that doesn't sound bad because they have so attached you are so attached to them, and they've shown you enough love bomb situations that you can't reconcile someone who would do kind things and nice things, buying clothes and bags and taking you on trips and being kind to your family, with someone who's asking you to do something that's going to re-traumatize you from your past. You can't reconcile those two things. So you go along with it. And here's the kicker. Then when you do the thing that devalues you, they turn around and say,
I know what
you
you're going to
wanted
say.
it. You wanted it. It's your idea, and you're the one that set it up.
And actually, what I've heard is, and you're a whore.
And you're a whore.
And
Exactly.
you're a whore.
Exactly. So then that degrading then becomes what they start saying to you. And
Which
they're
then
the
you start
ones
to believe, by the way.
that then you've done this thing that you didn't want to do,
That's
or
right.
the a client has done this thing that they didn't want to do, and then all of a sudden they don't know whether or not, it's like the person gaslights them and they start hearing over and over, you wanted this, you wanted this, you're the one that set it up, you're the one that set it up. And the entire time, they're the ones that preyed upon the weaknesses that you've been sharing with them, being in that intimate partner relationship. That is a part of coercive control. And they get a kick. They call it duper's delight. They get a kick out of having you do something against your will that you've
I
told
mean,
them.
listen, before we get into Diddy, the case that's coming to mind for me is this case in France, which, in the case where this gentleman was literally drugging his wife.
Exactly.
And I don't know how many tens of men, I think they said up to 70 men,
Yes.
he had them rape her, and he got off by watching. And
Correct.
she was drugged, so she didn't know what was happening. I mean, this is the most intense case,
Mhm.
and a massive violation of betrayal and loyalty and trust. And
Mhm.
um, listen, I've been very familiar with cases where they don't drug the woman and they just say, if you love me enough, you'll let me watch, which will get us into these freak-offs.
Correct.
And the situation with Diddy and these freak-offs, this is not a one-off. This is not a Diddy situation. I've heard it. I've been familiarized with this for many years, where partners have this fantasy
Yes.
and they want to see their spouse have sex with another person.
Yes.
And it's kind of positioned as, if you really love me, you'll do this.
And they present it, it's very interesting. They present it as a trust, that they're so close to you and they trust you so much to let you into those inner spaces in their fantasy, and they want you to be the person. They create this kind of attachment, that you're so special, that they want you to be the person that experiences this fantasy with them. And if they are a person that, let's say, is homosexual and they're with a woman, a man with a woman, but they're really undercover homosexual, then they, like the Cassie situation with Diddy, want to see a man with their woman because they're really getting some kind of um, getting off to seeing the
The
man,
man.
not really the woman that they're with.
So fascinating.
Or if they have, other fantasies, threesomes, and all the rest of it, they will try to convince their partner who is not homosexual. And there's nothing wrong with people having different, proclivities
Yeah.
or different, orientations. But let's say that they have a woman who is not a lesbian. They will try to get her to be a lesbian because they want to have the experience of having multiple women and convince that woman to start having desires that she doesn't have. And they say it like, I trust you to be a part of this. I want this to be something that you do for me. I'll do all of these things to take care of you. The woman that will give me this fantasy, there's nothing I won't do for her. They create kind of again, it's a delusion. It's a fantasy world. And they invite their partner into that fantasy world. And by doing so, what ends up happening is the woman and or man, because this can happen on both ends of the spectrum in terms of who's doing it, ends up betraying their values, going against their body, going against their trauma history and their trauma experiences, and doing things they don't want to do, either through fear that some punishment is going to be to happen, their money's going to be taken away, they're going to be cut off, they'll be fired if it's a work situation, or that physically they're going to be harmed, like the Cassie situation. So it creates an environment where you don't have voice, choice, agency, and you're literally
Yeah.
programmed and controlled.
So deep breaths.
It's a lot. Yeah,
It's a
it's a lot.
lot. And I am, as I have been in all of the other episodes, sensitive to who's listening, sensitive to who's sitting in their car with a tear rolling down their face, perhaps they've been in this experience. They've done it in order to maintain the relationship. They've done it out of survival. I think that's really important to recognize here and label.
Yes. Yes.
And so I honor whoever's listening to this and feeling seen and heard and understood, and just know that, we're talking about this from a compassionate place, but it's important to discuss it because it is so difficult. People don't talk about it.
And it's that they call it a humiliation ritual. It's humiliating. Once the person, if they're lucky enough, like Cassie, to break away from that relationship and they realize what they have been in, because when you're in it, the
Right.
person's telling you things and doing things that intermittently show you loving behavior and then show you abusive behavior. And so your mind is not fully connected to what's really going on until you're away from that person. And so when you're away from that person, finally, what ends up happening is you almost come out of it, like you coming out of amnesia. I mean,
Like
anesthesia.
coming out of a fog.
Yeah, like you're coming out of anesthesia. And inevitably, what happens is the person feels obviously violated,
Right.
humiliated, degraded, and as a result, because they quote unquote participated, because they said yes,
Right.
because they went along with it, because they didn't say no. Sometimes they don't say yes, they just don't say no. They don't feel like they can talk to anybody about it at all. And the other element is the nature of there being drugs and alcohol involved in many of these situations to further inhibit that person's capacity to think and have agency.
And I think the other thing to mention is, not in all cases, obviously, but in many cases it's filmed.
And that's right.
It's recorded.
That's right.
And that is used as leverage and
it's
weaponized.
shared often with, obviously, without their
And
consent.
so there's a fear of how exposed is this going to get. And it's a way to keep people silenced and in further control when they're gone.
Yes. And this is one of the things that's becoming very clear from this Diddy case, that those evidences, those tapes, those recordings are what kept so many people, whether they were industry people, music industry people, whether they were male or female, whether they were, in the relationship having these freakoffs with, Diddy and Cassie or not. Because there were recordings of it that could be exposed to their families, to their children, keep them from being able to work anymore.
It's a ransom.
It's a ransom. It is.
So for those not familiar with the Diddy case, which if you're under a rock, perhaps, because it's just blowing up the news, it's blowing up social media, but I appreciate anybody that's keeping themselves off of social media. So let's just give like an overview of what it means when we say the Diddy case. So we've got Sean Combs, who is a very well-known music producer, rapper, music mogul, very well connected
A billionaire.
The music space, a billionaire. And he starts dating, correct? This gal, Cassie.
Yes, she was around, I think, between 19 and 20 when.
And how old was he at the time?
I think, I don't know the exact age, but it was much older, much older.
And was he still married to Kim Porter at that time, or no?
He never married Kim Porter. They were in a relationship, and
That's
I think they were, yeah.
And they had a number of children together, him and Kim. Okay. So he starts dating Cassie, and part of what's coming up in this case, even though this is, there's a lot of different charges against Sean Combs. There's RICO charges. There are sex trafficking charges. There are a lot of major charges, but she is kind of the star witness because there was video footage that had been released of him physically harming her. in a hotel, which ends up being after a freak off. So let's
Right.
describe what a freak off is. How would you describe what a freak off is to the listener?
Well, what we have learned from the testimony was it was scheduled sexual encounters between Cassie and another man while Sean Combs watched it.
Right. And often it was like a paid escort of
And it
some
was a
sort.
paid sex worker or a male escort. And those men were, Diddy had Cassie go through the process of vetting the people. So she would have to contact these men and set these whole scenarios up, set up the hotel, set up the different, things that needed to be there and schedule the time, the date, etc. So in essence, he made her a part of sex trafficking through her arranging of all of these freak offs.
And do you think that that was intentional, just to be able to push the blame and to make himself quote unquote safe?
Absolutely, because if the person who is being abused, which I want to make it clear, Cassie was in a coercive, controlling, abusive relationship
Mhm.
underneath both her boyfriend and her boss. We want to make that clear. She signed
Yeah.
a
So
10-year deal with him, so all of her music career was controlled by him.
right. So
If
she
she
was a part of his record label,
called Bad Boy, yes.
right?
Mhm.
And Bad Boy Records. And she was also in an intimate relationship with him.
Right, and she was also an employee.
Right.
So there's some different elements of this case in which the line that they're trying to draw is this is not just a personal relationship with consensual adults operating out of their free will. This was an employee who was controlled in terms of her decision making by her boss to execute things that he was asking her to do, and the consequence of that would be, obviously he was going to blackmail. He was blackmailing her, saying that he would expose these tapes. Her mother has come in to, say that they had to pay him off in order to not
Right. I saw
expose these
that.
tapes. And so not only was her career controlled, and her capacity to make money for herself was controlled. She was literally like a slave because she had signed this record deal for 10 years. She couldn't do
Right.
anything with her career outside of that.
And it's important to set the framework, because anytime we're in a power dynamic
That's right.
where, and from a hierarchical perspective in an organization,
Mhm.
someone who has a higher level of power than someone else ends up in a sexual encounter or an intimate relationship, it is considered coerced, because there's this idea that the person didn't have the ability to say no. I mean, physically, did they have the ability? Yes. But the idea that they had power and control over their career mitigated that and trumps that. And we've seen that in the morning show on Apple
Mhm.
TV, right? We saw that in what happened at the Today Show with Matt Lauer.
That's
We've
right.
seen that and happen in a lot of other cases that we're going to talk about here,
That's
where there is this is the coercion. There's a sense of, are you going to really say no to me? Because, I could probably get you somewhere.
that's right.
I could
And or
probably utilize this.
and or are you really going to say no to me because I can fire you and
That's
blackball you and you won't be able to work anywhere else?
ever. Right.
Or you're just going to lose income, or you're just going to lose your livelihood, or you're just going to lose the ability to take care of your family and your children and yourself. Those consequences, yes, she could have said no to certain things, but she could not have said no without consequences. And her specific consequences, as per the video of her brutal beating, were physical abuse, sexual abuse, which she testified to a rape. The She went out with a guy named Kid Cudi. His car was blown up. There was a lot of different ways of intimidation, of coercion, of um, allowing this not allowing this young lady to be able to operate from her own agency that have been
I
put
think
in.
that that's the word that's so important, is the agency, which for people who are not familiar with that word, it really just means that you have a say over your own decisions. And, I think it's also important to recognize, where was I going to go with that? The Freakoffs. I saw an article about, listen, people love to have opinions, right? So you've got always a school of thought and a group of people that are saying she should have just left. She
Mhm.
could have done whatever. Why did she participate? It's like asking anybody who's been in domestic violence, why did you stay? It's a horrible question to ask.
Yes.
But one of the things I found so honest, so brutally honest for her to say was, listen, I loved this man
Yes.
and I thought I was special to him. And it felt good to be the chosen one, to be special, to be, elected by him in so many ways. And he's a busy man. So I didn't get a lot of alone time with him. So any time with him was valuable time for me.
Yeah.
And so if his schedule was so crazy and the only time I'd see him that week was during the freak off, that was part of my reasoning. And I don't think anybody has a place to judge that, because
Yeah.
we don't know all that was happening behind the scenes. We're hearing snippets of everything. We don't know what kind of love bombing he was doing. He was not only, listen, was not only her employer, she was not only signed to this record label as an artist, he was not only her intimate partner, but he also was carrying her apartment. She was carrying her expenses. I
Correct.
mean, the level of control here was extraordinary.
Extraordinarily high. So her, and let's add this into it with this particular case. Her attempts to leave were met with him sending in other employees to
Right.
go and find her and bring her back. And when she was brought back, she was abused further.
That's right.
So there was a lot of different elements to this particular case, and there are more coming out. I mean, they were only on, I think, the
Every
11th
day.
day. It's more things coming out every day. This was a system. It was a system of coercion. It wasn't just a one person thing. No one could have done this kind of enterprise by themselves. And so there were a lot of different supports to keep this particular young lady in line, and to keep her submissive. We use the word for coercive control, submissive.
Right. And I
Um,
think it's important to point out, we'll just say this from a factual standpoint,
mhm,
that there are other people that were involved in this system that are no longer here
that are no longer here.
to be
Yes,
able to talk about it.
correct. And what ends up happening in coercively controlling situations is the abuser will drop hints
Mm-hmm.
that they can make you disappear.
Yep.
The abuser will drop lines that, oh, I have people when people step out of line. I have people that I can call if someone's really messing with me. I have ways to make sure that people don't, come against me or talk. Those are the kind of dog whistling comments that are said to that survivor or that victim, that when the next time they're asked to do something, they're more likely to comply. They are trying to create an environment where you just submit, where you just comply. And even when you do comply, they will not accept what you're doing with gratitude or appreciation.
Or as enough.
They or as enough. They actually use your giving in to what they have asked you to do, that is humiliating and degrading, to then turn around and call you all kinds of deplorable names, that are dehumanizing. There's actually a checklist. Like we call it the coercive control checklist. And there's a couple of things that I want to make sure people think about. The first
Yeah.
one is, do you feel afraid to be yourself with this person? Can you tell the truth to this person? Are you afraid to speak or speak up? Do they control what you do, what you say, where you go, what you wear,
What you eat.
what you eat, how much you eat, any of those things. Do they put you down or publicly embarrass you? Do they make jokes at your expense on a regular basis? Or do they bring up sensitive information that you've shared with them and put it on display publicly so that, that particular secret or sensitive thing is now something that has been, put in front of other people? Or do they threaten to do that, which is the
Mhm.
case in this situation? Are you constantly accused of cheating or flirting with other people or looking at other people? Um, One of the things that came across with this particular case was Cassie going out with somebody else, and then all of a sudden she's, that those people are being, stalked, harassed, and attempted other things.
Other
We don't know
things.
all the other things yet, so I don't want to say that. Um, do they pressure you, force, coerce, or continue to ask you over and over and over again to do something sexual that you've already told them no to? This is important, that you've already told them you don't want to do, that you've already told them that would make you feel bad, but they continue, especially after incidences of them doing something seemingly kind, to ask you to go against your no. Um, do they threaten to hurt you? Do they threaten to hurt themselves if you leave them? Do they
That's the killer.
do they threaten to hurt your friends and your family? Um,
And I should put this out there because I've heard this one many times, or your pet.
or your pets or
I've
your
seen that,
kids? Yeah,
where it's one of these things where they're violent with the pet, but they're
yeah,
not violent with the people, but it gives you
yes,
enough sense that they're capable of violence.
yes,
And so it's just kind of like that drip. It's almost the dog whistle, but it's the what I'm capable of,
yeah.
but you can't ever say I've ever done it to a person.
That's right. That's right. Do they, as we talked about, it's actually a criminal offense, simple assault. Do they threaten to harm you? Do they threaten it through their physical actions, meaning punching walls, punching steering wheels, breaking things, running over things? I've heard people had, their spouse accidentally ran over their foot, things like that.
Right.
Or accidentally backed the car too close to them and they went into a wall. um, do they, take objects and break down doors, break furniture, all of those things? All of that's called simple assault. um,
Mhm.
do they constantly look at your location, monitor your phone, monitor your email? Are you under surveillance? Are you being monitored by that person? And then when you do something, they call it into question and say you're doing something against them, or they act in a very suspicious way, or say you're cheating or you're with somebody else when you're not.
And another good example of that is not just with your phone and your email and your text, but also cameras throughout the house, cameras throughout the property,
Recordings,
recording
devices.
devices in your car.
Correct. All of those things, like the little tiles underneath your vehicle, so they can, monitor your your whereabouts and your location. Do
Yeah.
they forward if you have an Apple device? Do they forward all of your text messages to their phone and you don't know that they've done that? Because
Mm,
you can forward people's stuff and send it anywhere. You can send it to emails, you can send it to telephone numbers. And sometimes they'll go into their partner's telephone and have all of their text messages forward and they don't know it's happening. So every time people are talking to them, they can see all of it. Do
mhm.
they limit your access to money? Do they give you an allowance and you don't have access to bank accounts so that you're able to do things on your own? If you have access to their cards, are they monitoring all of your spending and constantly questioning anything that you're doing? Were you with somebody? Were you X, Y, or Z? Um, do they take your keys, your driver's license, or some other measure like a passport that
Right.
would prohibit you from being able to leave their presence? Those are kind of the coercive control checklist items that everybody should look for. I've experienced quite a few of these myself. What ends up happening is it literally over time, your movement to start making your own choices and decisions, especially when you're speaking and they stop you from speaking and they rage. So then you stop speaking altogether. You just stop
Right.
saying anything. All of these things over time make you compliant, create an atmosphere for you to be
It's the submission.
submissive. And also, it puts you in a position where it starts to deteriorate your capacity to make decisions because you stop making them for yourself and you start thinking in line with what can I do that's not going to get me into some kind of violent situation, punishment,
Well,
or
that's what
have,
I hear often. I'm
yeah,
going to get in trouble.
yeah, or I'm not going to get in trouble. So then you are now wired according to their thinking, their wishes, their desires, what will cause them to feel happy. And so some of the things that happen in this particular case that people are having comments about is some of the text messages where Cassie is saying, I can't wait for the next freak off. I'm always down for a freak off. What happens to a person who has been coercively controlled is they are now wired for compliance and fawning. It can create what's called Stockholm syndrome, where you have um, an allegiance and a love, kind of wonderful, warm feelings towards an abuser because you think if you do what they ask, you'll receive less violence and punishment over time. It's something that has happened historically in a case, I think it was in Stockholm, where it was Sweden, where children who were abducted, or it might have been a woman who was abducted,
Right.
actually fell in love with, or her abuser, and defended and protected her abuser because her mind had been so conditioned and programmed and coercively controlled that
This is why I call it psychological terror.
because that being compliant with and even having warm feelings made the person feel safer in the danger than seeing them as a monster. So
But isn't that the most brilliant coping strategy that someone could come up with? My God,
it
like,
really is.
what do I need to do to find a sense of safety and security in this incredibly unsafe and secure situation?
And so those text messages from Cassie, I immediately saw as her attempts to create an atmosphere where she would not be resistant. She would be participatory and compliant. And maybe that would, in most of those instances, those were right before events where she would have to go out publicly. And so if she participated in the freak off, maybe he wouldn't beat her and she have a black eye before this big event that she was going to have to go to and not be able to attend. I saw it immediately. And so everyone's saying, not everyone, but a lot of people are questioning, whether or not she was wanting to do it and compliant and all the rest. She wanted someone urinating on her. She wanted someone doing all of these vile things. I see it as a textbook case of a person who has been brainwashed, programmed, and conditioned to participate in something they don't want to participate in for survival. It's coercive control.
Deep breaths. Because I know for sure someone's listening to this and they checked off all the boxes.
Correct.
Or they checked off the majority of the boxes. And so, as I said earlier, we're just going to take a pause to honor and give your nervous system some space. So, this can be very triggering content. And, we're mindful as we share it as trauma practitioners.
Yes.
But we're also so aware that there's no value and there's no benefit to us to not share the reality of the situation and to not share the truth. Both Kim and I have seen all of what she just described with clients. We've seen it. And so it's important for whoever's listening, feeling whatever it is that they're feeling, that they're not alone, that you're not the only one. more importantly than not, my God, you are not a part of the problem.
Yes.
You did not create this for yourself. You are not to blame. You are not the narcissist. How often do we hear that from our clients? Am I the problem? Am I the maybe I'm the one. Maybe I'm the aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
That's also part of the coercive control. So if, we've got people listening that, they're a little jarred, what I'm just going to say is if you need to pause. We're not going to take any offense. This is why we're doing this series. And if you're coming to this and this is your first episode of the 5, circle back to 1, 2, 3, and 4, because we're kind of giving a roadmap to what this type of abuse is, narcissism and coercion and gaslighting and love bombing. It's used so much in social media. I think it loses its intensity. It loses its true meaning. And it's really important that we understand what it truly is.
Yes.
And how serious it is and how important it is to get out.
Yes. And the reality, and I love this week that I think it's in Queensland, Australia, that they've actually caught up to the reality that this is a crime.
Yeah.
This is violence, that you call it psychological terrorism.
Yeah.
That this is the siphoning of a person's soul and their will to make choices for their own life, through coercion and through abuse. And
Yeah.
it is criminal behavior. It's criminal mindedness in every way.
I think it's important also that, let's just say hypothetically you're a listener and you know someone who is telling you that they've gotten out of this very toxic narcissistic abuse. And because they're away from the relationship, in your mind, you're like, well, why are we still harboring on this? Like, it ended a year ago, or you got out of it 6 months ago, or whatever the case is. The level of healing that these people need to do, first of all, to your point, it takes a little bit of time once they're out of it for them to even allow themselves to recognize and acknowledge that they were in an abusive situation.
Yes.
They're not necessarily leaving. I mean, they might know it's abusive. They more likely know it's toxic. But they're, because, and this is like the Stockholm piece, because the need and ability to survive it while you're in it trumps the fact that what's happening is happening. You're denying yourself your own reality as a form of survival. And this is not a conscious thing that's happening.
Yes.
And so when you leave, it takes, I would say, quite a while. I'm thinking, a number of months to allow yourself to feel safe and secure enough in your own body, in your own new space, to even allow the part of you that's been protecting you from all of that to soften enough so you can actually say, this was so much more than I even understood while I was in it. So it takes months for somebody to even get to that point. And then it takes a lot of time to just hold space for that recognition and for that grief.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can start to unravel what happened. And then they can start to the very small steps towards healing. It's a very long process.
It is. It truly is.
And so I ask if you're listening and you know somebody who's kind of tried to share with you in their own words that they've been in something like this, perhaps now you'll understand it from a little bit more of a different lens and a clearer lens, and offer some empathy and some compassion, because this is really unlike any other form of abuse that you can imagine.
It really is. And, one of the things that I want to make sure is said, because most people in this situation have said no. They've tried to leave certain circumstances and walked away, or attempted to walk away. They've had the person continue to manipulate their minds through the abuse cycle, through love bombing and being kind and hot and cold, nice and nasty, all of those things, and eventually decided or just gave in to the person's wishes. That still doesn't mean that's your consent. It
That's
still
right.
doesn't mean that's what you would have done independently of your own will without that coercion. And I think it's important to say that
It's so important.
because the abuser is going to tell you that you asked for it, you wanted it. If it's a Cassie like situation, you participated, you planned it, you're the one that gave into it, you're the one that agreed to it. And that's typically after a very long runway of their grooming, conditioning, and manipulation. And most of the time, once you do what they're asking you to do, they will come back on the back end and devalue that because you weren't enthusiastic enough, because you didn't plan it well enough, because you don't do it away from them. And so it's really not of your will because you only did it because they asked you to. These are the different mental mind games that can happen that consistently keep you in a position where you are being devalued, dehumanized, and made to feel like you're not enough. That's how they get you to keep going through the process of that
Yeah.
abuse cycle over time. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that consent is that you of your independent will, without anyone's coercion, without anyone's threats, without anyone's punishments, without
They're in
their
intimidation.
intimidations, their simple assaults, that you decide to do something independently of another person, and you do that because it's something that you want. You want, not that you are going along with in order to
Right.
not experience violence. And I think it's important for that to be said.
Four more words: Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein. Guys, this is not isolated to Diddy. And it's not even isolated to Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein. These
Yeah.
are just the things that play out in the media.
Yes.
This is a much more pervasive thing than people realize and recognize. And I'm so glad that, pre-recording, we're in the back green room going, what do we want to talk about today? Because there's just so many layers to this type of abuse. And we both landed on coercive control so quickly, mainly because it's being played out. And I think it's also can be very triggering because it's being played out,
Right.
especially for people who maybe have been in this, but they actually don't have the language to it, or it's been done in isolation. And so there's so much shame wrapped in it. They've never talked about it. And now they're seeing it happen
Yes.
in a very public stage, and they're identifying with it. And I'm sure that that's incredibly upsetting for these people as well.
Yes. Yeah. Um, I have a heart. I've had to take breaks from listening to the details
I
of
am
this.
consuming it in the
Yeah.
smallest, most minute
Yeah,
details.
I've had to take breaks, and I've taken those breaks because some of the testimony has brought up my own experiences that I've had
Mm,
to go do some personal work on for myself,
mm,
and have more, releasing of any kind of I'm going to use the word, any kind of projected accountability. I'm releasing that projected accountability and putting it squarely on the abuser, who typically these people are, I'll call it professionals. They do this over and over and over again. And so your circumstance is not isolated. There are a trail of people they've done it to before you, and there'll be a trail of people until they're held accountable that they'll do it after.
Well, this is why this case is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can stop the cycle, at least the one that he was perpetuating. And, I said to my husband over the weekend, I was like, I need to know Diddy's ACEs score. I was like, I want to understand how, what happened to all of these offenders that we talk about. And this is not to excuse it. I'm just so deeply curious.
Yes.
To what is it that you experienced, or what was missing for you in your early developmental years that you were so disconnected, and you can see people as property and you see people as objects and you treat them as such, that you do not recognize that this is not okay behavior.
Yes. And that the other piece of this was the having two standards. There were things this person was freely doing with other women, with other people. They're free to have agency for themselves, their own choices with what they do, and then have you basically in a prison where you're only at their disposal. There were two different standards that were met in this case, where Cassie could not do certain things that the other person was free to do. And that is typically a part of this coercive control, is having those double standards and having those. And not only that, when you do something, it is a grievous offense. Like, you would think that you had committed a crime, and they can freely do it with no consequence. And that's
I think of just the simplest example of that is money.
Absolutely.
The simple example of that is money. What do you mean you spent $100 at the food store? What are you talking about? And by the way, I just bought
a $50,000 car.
$150,000 car. Yeah, I was going to say $150,000 car.
Yeah.
Without a blip.
Right. And it's the control. It's the dominance. It's the exertion of power over another person. And it is incredibly dehumanizing, and it's incredibly invalidating of your dignity. That's what I saw in this case, and that's what I've seen in the Epstein case, and that's what I see in Harvey Weinstein's case. It's a not acknowledging the dignity of life for another human being, and treating that person like they're a disposable item.
And by the way, in that mix, we end up with what's known as DARVO.
That's right.
Okay, so DARVO stands for D is deny, A is attack, and then RVO is that reverse victim offender order, right? And so we're denying that I even asked you to do that. I'm attacking you for doing it. And now woe is me. I'm the victim and you're the problem, which is why so many people that are on the receiving end of this become so confused and believe that they are actually the offender.
Yeah, and they say
it very question whether or not they're the quote unquote narcissist or they're quote unquote the abuser, but that is by design. That is all a part of this very systemic cycle of abuse. And by the way, go ahead.
And I was going to say it is a way for them to uproot you from reality. Literally, it's a way for them to disconnect you from what's actually going on, so that your mind cannot. And, when a person has been in this environment, their brain is damaged. I literally heard the testimony of, oh, I loved him and I still love him and I still, want the best, think of the best of the times. And I'm going, this girl's brain is damaged. It has to be to have endured that for 10 years. It's not because there's something wrong with that person. It's something that happened to that person that caused that damage over time. And the longer you're in it, the longer you're conditioned to think according to that abuser's way.
Well, it's their plan. And, I think it's also important to point out, because I've seen this in many cases, where the offender is also like on the board or on the committee of like a domestic violence association, a domestic violence shelter. Like they're so in it as a mask to be able to not be seen as the offender.
Yes. They are coach meaning a coach for little league or whatever. There's somebody in the community. They may be a court appointed special advocate for foster kids. They may
Yeah,
be
I've
a
seen
part of the
that with
Boys and
CAFA.
Girls Club. They may be a part of something that celebrates the empowerment of women. They put themselves. It's all a part of the humiliation ritual. It's all a part of their cover and their
And it's all a
mask.
part of getting you to be more confused. I interviewed somebody for the podcast many years ago. I have her book behind me on my bookshelf. Her name is Dee Carrillo, and she told a story on the podcast. She was in foster care for many years, the majority of her life. And the longest foster care placement she had, the mother in that foster care, and it was like over a decade, was this. It was just coercive control, narcissistic abuse. And she was on the board of a major city's domestic violence shelter, as well as like the CASA, which is a court appointed
Court-appointed
special
special advocate.
advocate
Yes.
for, kids that don't have a guardian when they're in court, say for fostership or guardianship. And it's that kind of example where they put themselves on display publicly in the community. And yet what's happening behind closed doors is the antithesis of what it is that they say that they're working towards squashing and preventing. I mean,
Correct.
It is so diabolically strategic and
Correct.
created to be such.
They're typically what we've talked about different types of narcissists. They can be communal, meaning they're judges, they're attorneys, they're in the government in a high position that helps take care of the weak or the poor in the community. They're a
Pastors, I've
pastor.
heard that many times.
Yeah, they're pastors. They're a lot of pastors, a lot of priests, things like that you're in a situation where there's no way that person could be behaving that way because they stand in front of so many people advocating for the exact opposite. They're not just a con artist. They are actually a lie. They are the embodiment of that. They're a double standard, walking double standard. And because of that, when someone who is being abused by them speaks up, no one typically believes them. They
will tell the victim that no one's
no one's
going
going to
to
believe
believe you. Look at who I am.
Yeah,
Look at what I represent.
exactly.
Look at what board I'm on. Look at what church I run. Look at what I do. Who's going to believe you? So it is just a part of a wicked cycle.
Yeah. And they pick people. See, Cassie was just a young girl who she hadn't even started her life yet. They pick people who they think are no-name people that can be easily discarded, that don't have connections, that don't have clout, that don't have position. They go after those that are in need, that may be in desperate situations. And it's very predatory, like a pedophile. They go after what they perceive as a weaker person or a person who is more vulnerable, because those are people that are easily in their minds disposed of and
All
not
right.
believed.
So as we wrap this up, what are the biggest takeaways for our listener today, do you think?
I would say, if this is an intimate partner situation, and we kind of talked about this a little while ago, be very aware when someone invites you into a fantasy. Be very aware when someone tries to um, get you to go against something you've already told them no to. And does it in a very subtle way and keeps bringing it back over time in different ways. Be very aware that that is the stuff of coercion. That is the
Mm.
stuff of manipulation. And typically that's included in that, those requests to fulfill a fantasy, those requests to, open yourself up to something that you've already told them you don't want to do. A part of that is them doing very what would be considered kind, grand acts, doing
Mm.
big things that would, disarm you or make you feel some sense of, attachment, bond, or connection with them. They may buy you a house. They might buy you a car. They may start giving you an allowance every month and paying all your bills. They may do something kind for one of your children. They may pay for college. Those are the big kind of things. They may start saying, I want to, anything that you want to do for surgeries or plastics, whatever you want. If you want facials, if you want this, diamonds, trips, all of those things are meant to disarm you from being able to see that they're manipulating you on the back end of that. So, if
Mm.
anything, I would say is be very aware when someone is inviting you into a delusion, a fantasy world, and asking you to be an actor in it, a player in it. Okay. And then also be very aware when someone does big, grandiose things and on the back end of that asks you to do something that would be violating to you or you've communicated you don't want to do.
Deep breaths.
Yeah. Those two
Guys, this
things.
was a heavy one. I know episode 2 and 3 were heavy. I think 5's the heaviest so far. But again, I think it is really, really important that we discuss it. I feel so strongly that as practitioners, it is not our job to sugarcoat it, but it is our job to hold space
Mm.
so you can have as soft of a landing as possible. If this spoke to you, I know Kim is really putting a lot of content out in the last few, week and a half, 2 weeks about coercive control. And you want to find her at I am Kimberly Weeks on Instagram. And also, before we sign off, can you talk more about your Stand Firm program? And if people are resonating with this, what that looks like and what they might be able to engage in.
Yeah, absolutely. I, as a result of walking with quite a few women who've experienced these kinds of things, especially around coercive control, I created a community called Stand Firm. It is an online transformational space for women. In that space, you're going to get daily support within an online community to be supported as you're making your plans to exit a situation like this or dealing with the aftermath of a situation like this. I do trainings and teachings as well that are walking you through a 7-phase cycle of how to walk away, stay away, and recover from abusive relationships or toxic relationships. The website is thenarcissisticabusecoach.com/stand firm for you to be able to get more information about it. But I would love to be able to connect with you on it as well. And you can reach me again on Instagram at I am Kimberly Weeks.
All right, we'll repeat it one more time. It is the narcissistic abuse
Coach.
coach.com/stand firm. The links obviously will be in the show notes. The links to all the previous episodes are in the show notes. And on Instagram, it's I am Kimberly Weeks. It is always such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for your time and your expertise. It is such an important topic to talk about, and I wouldn't want it to be done with anybody else. So I'm in gratitude. Hopefully my guests, my listeners are in gratitude. And if you are recognizing, understanding, acknowledging that you are in this type of coercive control, I really recommend that you go and check out the Stand Firm program. It is the narcissisticabuscoach.com/stand firm.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Kim. Oh, but did you want to add one more
One
thing?
thing I was going to say, there is on my main, just at the narcissisticabusecoach.com, there's a quiz. And it is am I in a toxic relationship quiz? And you can a lot of questions come from people of whether or not what they're in is actually toxic and harmful. Take that quiz. It'll give you a good insight on that as well.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Deep breaths. And I hope that you will take care and follow Kim. Look at the information, because this is not something to be done alone.
Absolutely.
You're going to need a lot of support, and Kim is the one that I would recommend. So thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate you.